Oxygen Transport by Alexis Herring, Demi Hernandez, and Cheryl Madeline. Oxygen transport is a process when oxygen is absorbed in the lungs by hemoglobin in circulating deoxygenated red blood cells and carried to the tissue. This process is made possible because hemoglobin can combine with oxygen at high concentration, like in the lungs, and release the same oxygen when the concentration is low, like in the tissues.
This is a red blood cell. Red blood cells' main function is to carry oxygen throughout the body. In order to transport oxygen, red blood cells have a unique shape. They are biconcave discs, have no nucleus, and can change shape when squeezing through capillaries. All of these features help red blood cells to transport oxygen.
Oxygen is mainly transported through the blood attached to hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is composed of 4 polypeptide chains, 2 alpha chains and 2 beta chains. Each chain is called a heme group. Each heme group has 1 iron molecule that can carry 1 oxygen molecule. Therefore, each hemoglobin molecule can carry 4 molecules of oxygen in the blood.
There are 2 types of hemoglobin. Deoxyhemoglobin, or reduced hemoglobin, is the combination when hemoglobin and oxygen are not attached. Deoxyhemoglobin is blue. The second type is oxyhemoglobin. This combination is when hemoglobin is attached to oxygen and is red-colored.
Hemoglobin can also have varying saturations. Hemoglobin is partially saturated when there are either 1, 2, or 3 oxygen molecules bound to the heme groups. Hemoglobin is fully saturated when there are 4 oxygen molecules bound to the heme groups. When any amount of oxygen binds with the heme groups, the hemoglobin molecule changes shape. The affinity of hemoglobin for oxygen changes with the extent of oxygen saturation. The red circles stand for the heme groups and the blue circles stand for oxygen.
This is the oxygen-hemoglobin dissociation curve. This graph explains how the properties of hemoglobin affect oxygen binding in the lungs and oxygen release in the tissues. The spot marked number 1 shows that in the tissues where pressure of oxygen is low, hemoglobin is less saturated with oxygen. The spot marked number 2 shows that in the lungs where pressure of oxygen is high, hemoglobin is fully saturated with oxygen.
Oxygen transport is affected by the partial pressure of oxygen, the pH of blood, the temperature of blood, and the partial pressure of carbon dioxide. In high partial pressure of oxygen, hemoglobin binds to oxygen because there is already a high number of oxygen present. However, when there is a low partial pressure of oxygen, hemoglobin releases oxygen to increase oxygen levels. When there is a high pH, there is a lower affinity for oxygen. This is because when there is a high pH, there is a high number of hydrogen ions, which also increases the amount of carbon dioxide. Therefore, more oxygen needs to be released. When there is a low pH, however, hemoglobin has a higher affinity for oxygen. This is because when there is a low pH, there is also a low concentration of hydrogen ions and carbon dioxide. Therefore, hemoglobin does not need to release more oxygen from red blood cells. When there is a high temperature of blood, hemoglobin releases oxygen because high temperature weakens the bonds between hemoglobin and oxygen. Conversely, when there is a low temperature, hemoglobin is able to bind more efficiently to oxygen. Lastly, a high partial pressure of carbon dioxide causes hemoglobin to release oxygen and maintain homeostasis. When the partial pressure of carbon dioxide is low, the opposite occurs and hemoglobin binds to oxygen.